Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Art Now, the speakers series, long-standing speaker series presented by the Department of Visual Arts at Western University. My name is Christophe Migone, and I would like to start by acknowledging the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples whose traditional lands we are gathered upon today in a virtual sense. We have much to learn from their systems of knowledge and ways of being, including how to learn respectfully. And given that we are in a learning institution, hopefully we can be at the forefront of that process. I'd like to now shift to a co-presenter this week, which is the McIntosh Gallery, and introduce Helen Gregory, who is the curator at the McIntosh.
Hi to everybody. Sorry for the slight delay. We are missing one of our panelists, although we have been in touch with him and he is trying to get on. So hopefully he will join us soon. Maybe first of all, I'll talk a little bit about the exhibition. Actually, no, what else will I say first? No, I'll talk a little bit about the exhibition first. So Theater from the Jungle is an exhibition that was created by the artists Richard Ibghy and Marilou Lemmens. Sorry, I am a little bit I'm a little concerned about the fact that we're missing a panelist. Okay, so hang on. Okay, so Theater from the Jungle, it's a collaborative video installation by, as I mentioned, Ibghy and Lemmens. It investigates the experience of immigrant labor in the Canadian meatpacking industry. Developed with the participation of workers who come from different cultural backgrounds and migratory circumstances, the project addresses life in the midst of an interlaced socio-cultural, economic, legal, and cross-border labor issues. Many of the workers arrived in Canada under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and the Provincial Nominee Program, the latter of which requires immigrants to work at the Maple Leaf Factory for 2 years in exchange for permanent residency. These pathway to permanent residency programs, which exist in every Canadian province, expose a vulnerable labor force to potential abuse and exploitation. Although Theater from the Jungle was created in 2018, the issues that Ibghy and Lemmens address are particularly resonant in light of our current circumstances. The precarity faced by such workers has become increasingly visible as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The culture of meatpacking factories is characterized by working long hours in close proximity. Unlike the many other industries that shut down as a safety measure last March, these plants were deemed an essential part of the food supply chain and stayed open even when social distancing wasn't possible. Over the past few months, meatpacking plants around the world have become the sites of COVID-19 outbreaks, bringing into sharp relief the risk of physical harm and psychological distress that such work on vulnerable workers who often have limited other opportunities for employment. When Richard and Mary Lou first sent their application or their project proposal to me, I was really impressed by how it related specifically to culture in southwestern Ontario, because we do live in this sort of agricultural it's an agricultural area, but also London, Ontario is the site for what is supposed to be the next, I guess, one of the largest poultry processing plants in the country. I believe that it's maybe, I've read that it's running late, perhaps due to the pandemic. So we're still missing Tony. Hang on, I'm just wondering, do I have any messages? Abby, have we heard from him? do I have any? Okay, I don't have any messages. Okay, we're gonna go ahead. First of all, I will introduce Richard and Marilou. And if Tony joins us, hopefully he'll join us shortly. I will introduce him too. Okay. So luckily I have quite a nice long bio for Richard and Marilou, which I'll use to introduce you. And hopefully Tony will join us before I finish this. So based in Durham Sud, Quebec. Oh, wait, was that him? Nope. That's Christophe, he's just disappeared. Based in Durham Sud, Quebec, Richard Ibghy and Marilou Lemmens maintain a collaborative artistic practice that spans multiple media, including video performance and installation. Working both sculpturally and with the body, their practice engages the possibility of escaping the productivist logic of modernism and its incarnations in areas of labor, economics, management, psychology, biology, and ethology. Their projects challenge the concept of objectivity and the scientific obsession with measurement by opting for idiosyncratic methodologies in practical experiments, processes of translation, and craft-based data visualization techniques. These processes allow for contingency, association, and playfulness, while also enabling the duo to collaborate with performers, activists, anthropologists, scientists, and communities. Intertwining an interest in performance-based practice with the complexity of human labor as it applies to both human and non-human relationships, past projects have explored how economic actions are described and represented, and how the logic of economy has infiltrated the most intimate aspects of our lives. Their interest in how we analyze and ascribe value to labor and time has informed projects such as Measures of Inequity, which was a 2016 project, which features a series of sculptures that give material form to graphs and diagrams, mapping the unequal distribution of wealth in a range of disciplines, from economics to sociology to management and gender studies. In their recent project, The Violence of Care from 2019, oh, Tony is here, okay. Oh, I see him. Okay, so in their recent project, The Violence of Care, Ibghy and Lemmens approach interspecies care as an embodied form of labor through an investigation into the human practice of creating ideal living environments for avian species. Theater from the Jungle, which is the subject of tonight's discussion, puts the focus squarely onto a group of former and current workers in a maple leaf meatpacking factory in an attempt to reveal and reverse how their value as individuals has been subsumed by their value as laborers. Ibghy and Lemmens have an impressive exhibition history, having exhibited at numerous national and international contemporary art spaces. Their work has been presented in solo exhibitions at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts in Omaha, Nebraska, at the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal, the Odin Gallery in Vancouver, the Agnes Etherington Art Center in Kingston, Esker Foundation in Calgary, Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery in Montreal, Jane Lombard Gallery in New York, and the International Studio and Curatorial Program also in New York, and many, many others. And with that, I am also very pleased to welcome Tony Weis to the meeting. So I'm just gonna leap into your bio, Tony. So Dr. Tony Weis has been a faculty member of the Department of Geography at Western since 2004, where he teaches courses centered on agriculture and food, environment and development, and animal geographies. His research is broadly located in the fields of political ecology with a focus on agriculture and food systems. His research was initially rooted in the Caribbean, examining the economic and environmental challenges facing small farmers within highly inequitable landscapes, and how neoliberal policy restructuring, trade liberalization, and surging imports have compounded enduring injustices. Hang on, I'm not done. His first book, The Global Food Economy, The Battle for the Future of Farming, analyzed the historical foundations, structural imbalances, and socio-ecological instabilities of world agriculture and food systems. Tony's research focuses on the illusions of cheap food and the biophysical contradictions of industrial agri-food systems, with particular attention to the phenomenal growth of livestock production. His second book, The Ecological Hoofprint, The Global Burden of Industrial Livestock, develops a conceptual framework for understanding the wide-ranging costs of this momentous aspect of agrarian and dietary change. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Richard and Mary Lou, who will talk about Theater of the Jungle.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank Christophe Mingone and the Department of Visual Arts at Western University for inviting us to the Art Now Speakers Series, and also Helen Gregory for co-inviting us, as well as inviting us to present Theater from the Jungle at the McIntosh Gallery. Also, I would like to thank you for all your work on the installation. There's a lot to say about the piece, but also because perhaps several of you won't have a chance to visit the gallery, we will be showing you some clips to give you a sense of the work. So we will jump right in and introduce a little bit of the process and the context that brought us to create this work.
So Theater from the Jungle began with an invitation from John G. Hampton, who was then the director at the Art Gallery of the Southwestern Manitoba. He invited us to present an exhibition at the gallery, and right off the bat we decided that we were going to present some new work. So through a couple of discussions with him where he laid out the context of Brandon, we quickly learned that it was that the city's biggest employer was Maple Leaf Foods, and that they had established in 2008 or 2009, 1998 or 1999, the largest hog manufacturing plant in Canada.
You mean processing and slaughtering?
No, manufacturing. They put together legs and noses and everything. And so, having worked a lot in the past through labor issues and practices, including how it affects the body and so forth, we decided that we were going to use that as a topic, basically, that we were going to spend some time in Brandon and put together a group of participants who were current or ex-Maple Leaf employees, but who were also immigrants to Canada, and see what would happen.
I'll try to give you a sense of the context of Brandon just briefly. Normally, we would go over questions of immigration and labor in Canada a little bit more in depth, but since we have Tony here with us, there are some things that I think he will be very well placed to develop and expand upon. So just a few words. Of course, Brandon in Manitoba is a relatively small city. It's a city of about 50,000 inhabitants. And when the plant opened around 1999, they had a very hard time retaining their workers. This is due to the difficult working conditions in meat processing plants. It's cold, the production line is very fast, but also the wages are very low.
It's also dangerous.
And it's dangerous. It's one thing about this industry that it's one of the most dangerous in North America. So for them, something fortunate happened that Manitoba introduced a provincial nominee program in 2001, and it enabled them to shift their hiring practices to recruit foreign workers to come and work at the plant. This program is one of many, as Helen mentioned, throughout Canada. Each province has different programs that intend to change over time. But this program demanded of workers to stay for about 2 years at the company in exchange for which they would have kind of express or faster pathway to permanent residency in Canada. Quickly, some problems with this kind of programs are that they make the workers dependent on the companies that employ them, and this opens the door to abuses. But at Maple Leaf Foods, one thing that was interesting was that the workers were unionized. So this is a bit of the context of this particular plan.
So when we got to Brandon, we quickly put together a work group of approximately 12 participants. We did this through word of mouth, by putting posters up, posting adverts online, and other means. And these 12 participants, as I mentioned earlier, were current or ex-employees of Maple Leaf Foods. And we met with them on a regular basis, about 2 or 3 times a week, over an extended period. Yeah, do you want to talk about
so some of the things that we did with the people who accepted to work with us, by the way, this was, of course, remunerated. Ooh.
We paid them.
It was, of course, we wanted to remunerate the people who worked with us, and we managed to get a pretty good budget to be able to offer them good working conditions for their participation. So some of the things that we did in the workshops with this group, let's say one of the things, I'll start with this, we're exploring physical movements. For several years, actually since 2012, we had been exploring how labor and also the pressures to be productive and to perform affects the body of workers and of individuals. We wanted to see how the need that is felt to be productive is internalized and affects how we move, how we relate to other people, how we experience space, objects. But we had been looking at these questions mostly by thinking and exploring forms of post-industrial labor. And in Brandon, we were working with people who work in a very typical industrial setup with a production line with a certain speed that is like determined. And so with them, with them, we explored the very movements that they would perform at their workstation in the plant. And this whole section of the project that developed into a video that's called Meatpacking was choreographed by the people who worked with us. And so they would define the movements, they would also set how they would work together. And what we chose was that the environment in which we would film them would be very bare. So all the tools, the protection gear, the equipment, the machineries, also the animal body parts were not present. It's a very minimal setup. And we'll show you a short extract. Maybe turn off the volume.
Okay. In addition to exploring physical movements, one thing that I forgot to mention is that when we initially spoke with John G. Hampton, before getting to Brandon, I happened to have been reading a novel entitled The Jungle. The Jungle was written by a journalist from New York City named Upton Sinclair, and he wrote it in 1906. And it's a novel that basically speaks or recounts the harrowing experience that immigrants lived through as they immigrated to Chicago to work in the meatpacking industry in the stockyards over there. And actually, that was actually an important reference for us. And so what we decided to do was we decided to create a reading group where we would read rewritten selections that we had chosen from the novel, and see what would happen if we had present-day immigrant workers reading words that were written by Upton Sinclair about 100 years ago about the situation of immigrant workers in meatpacking back then. And we wanted to see how that would resonate.
And I would just say most workers at the time that Sinclair describes were coming from Europe. So the protagonists in his novels are from Lithuania, and many of the other workers are from Ireland, Scotland, Poland.
And we wanted to sort of create this tension to not only see how it would feel, but also have the participants reading these selections and speak to them about what might have changed, what things are still the same, and basically to hear what they felt about that novel. So I'm going to play you a brief selection from the reading group. Okay, so this is not working. 1 second. 1 second. Hopefully I'll get this.
I'll just tell you that each one of the scenes in this video that's called the reading group, which is quite a long video, is filmed with either one or two or several of the participants from the reading group. So what we're seeing here will be just a few minutes from this video.
So you don't have anything else you want to add to that? Maybe.
You're sharing. Start from the beginning.
When I first came to the company, I remember how I stood and watched the whole killing and thought it was cruel and savage. And I was happy that I was not a hog. Now I realize that I am a hog, one of the packers' hogs. What they want from a hog is all the profits that they can get out of it. And that is what they want from the worker. And that's also what they want from the customer. What the hog thinks and what it suffers and are not considered. And the same is true with the worker and with the one who purchases the meat. That's true everywhere in the world, but it's especially true in packing town. There seems to be something about the work of slaughtering animals that tends to cruelty and brutality. It's a fact that for the packers, 100 human lives are not worth a penny of profit. The company is a monster with 1,000 mouths, crushing with 1,000 hoofs. It is a great butcher. It is the spirit of capitalism made flesh. On the ocean of commerce, it sails as a pirate ship. It has raised the black flag and declared war upon civilization. Bribery and corruption are its everyday methods. The city and provincial government are simply two of its branch offices. It has the power to prevent the inspection of its product and to falsify government reports. It violates the law. And when an investigation is threatened, it burns its books. In the commercial world, it is an unstoppable force. It wipes out thousands of small businesses every year, and it drives farmers to madness and suicide.
So, sorry. So one of the things that became very clear to us as we were progressing with the reading group was the question of whose voice is being heard. Regardless of how the text resonated with the current situation, we were very aware that, first of all, they were reading a text that we had rewritten from another text that was authored by an American journalist, who was then trying to put words in the mouth of fictional Lithuanian immigrants working in a hog processing plant. So the question was, is this the voice of current immigrant workers? Is this the voice of an American author 100 years ago? Is this the voice of fictional characters? Or is this the voice of two artists who are trying to communicate their own ideas? We decided to live with that ambiguity and even embrace it, and not try to resolve it or simplify it in any way. However, what we had decided to do was provide an opportunity for the participants to provide their own voices in their own manner. And so we invited them to undergo is a very bad word, to participate in an interview. And most of them agreed. And we also asked them if they would allow us to interview them in their own homes. We thought that this would allow them to speak their own voice in the comfort of their own context. The interviews generally dealt with where they came from and what they were doing in their home country before they came to Canada, what led them to decide to leave their country and to come to Canada, the process involved in arriving in Canada, how they arrived, what their feelings were, how they ended up working at Maple Leaf Foods, and what they thought about working there. I will play you another short extract from the interviews. It might take a second, and maybe while I do it, maybe Marilou could say something to keep people from. No, I don't think so.
I was a nurse.
No.
So I'll just maybe go over some of the things that Richard mentioned, but in the reading group, one of the points that was important for us was this issue of the relationship between text, author, and subject. And as artists, this disconnection was kind of important for us. I'll just finish this point. It was a disconnection between the experiences of the people that were speaking, the language they were using, and also sometimes the historical moment from which they were speaking.
I was a nurse and working at blood center.
A blood center?
Yeah.
Oh, so you would collect blood?
Yeah, and separate the cell. Yeah, the element of blood.
Okay, the red blood cells, the white blood cells,
yes.
The platelets.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that job?
Yeah, very. Yeah.
How long did you do it for?
For almost 20 years.
20 years?
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And then You said that you were married in China?
Oh, yes, yes.
And did you have any children?
I have one daughter.
Okay. And how did you decide to come to Canada?
The impact is come from my best friends, and she came to Canada in 1998. Yeah, and she always phone me and send a letter and talk to me, say how good Canada is. Yeah, and she sent me, she want me apply to come to Canada.
Okay, yeah. And where did she live in Canada?
In Toronto.
And what was she doing?
She ran a convenience store, yeah, for a few years. And now she just stay home because her husband have very good job, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so when did she first tell you about Canada? Do you remember?
I know her everything, like when she applied to come to Canada. But at that time, maybe she know nothing. Not now it's very convenient to you get all the information from internet. But at that time, it's not this situation.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
And so, do you remember when when did you decide to come to Canada? What year?
I applied from 2005 start. 2005. Yeah. So we got visa. 2007.
Okay, so
yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, for 2 years.
But if you enjoyed your job in China, why did you choose? What made you want to come to Canada?
I think the only attract me really is better education for the children.
Okay.
So that's the most part really attract me. I was a nurse and working.
Okay. So that was an interview, by the way, with Chen Xiuzhang.
It's just a fragment from the interview.
Most of them last between 40 and 50 minutes long.
We could talk about the interviews a little bit more. I know we're running out of time. We don't want to take too much time because we want to hear Tony. So one thing that comes across in the interviews is the different contexts and motivations of the participants to decide to leave one place to come to another. And there's also a whole discussion about the actual work in the meatpacking industry. For us, there's maybe two things I would like to add about this project. Working with participants really changed everything. Because before coming to Brandon, we had read a lot of books, we had looked at numbers of essays and news reports. So we had a very abstract sense of the situation, and often those texts would emphasize the issues, the structural issues with labor regulations, with temporary foreign workers in Canada, and they would depict a little bit like Upton Sinclair, but of course in a very different way, the workers as a subject to a kind of violence, and often without much agency. And what we realized working with this group was actually the opposite, was the agency of the people that we met, the decisions that they took, how they made choices and they calculated, and they were able also to use these very problematic structures that are often racist and exploitative, but they were still able to use these to accomplish something that they wanted. So often people who worked at Maple Leaf Foods would study English, also study to get a qualification to start working in another profession, another industry, and accomplish things that were important for them. So this question of agency became really important for us. And we thought that by having a place for them to use their own words to present their story would allow us to translate a little bit of this.
I think I'll just add, end on notion that our way of trying to provide a voice to our participants was highly imperfect. There is no, because in the end, it was us who was, we were aware that it was us that were providing them with the platform. That's not really an equal footing. However, as artists, it's impossible to subtract yourself completely when it is your exhibition. However, I think that in the project, dealing with these issues, we try to deal with them and accept and embrace the complexity that that ensued. And so, in addition to, I think, being a project about foreign immigrant workers in meatpacking in a specific city in Manitoba, I think it also addresses the question of voice and the like.
Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to say a couple of things before I turn it over to Tony. So I realized earlier that I forgot to mention that students can submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of their Zoom screen. So I'd like to encourage, any of the Art Now students or any other viewers that we have participating tonight to submit questions, because hopefully we'll have a few minutes to answer some questions. Also, this is obviously just given sort of a brief snippet about the exhibition. And I'd like to encourage anybody who's in London to come and make an appointment to see the show at the gallery, which is running until October 24th. On our website, there is a link where you can book make an appointment. Oh, there's one other thing. Oh, also, and if you're not in London, because I know that we have a lot of, there are a lot of students across the world right now who are enrolled in this class. We have some excerpts from some of the videos on our website. So you'll see that there's like a little drop-down menu. So you'll be able to see some of the videos, and then some more will actually be added next week. So you will be able to get, some sense of the exhibition. But if you're here, I would absolutely encourage, everybody to actually come and try to come and see it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tony Weis, who is ready to go.
Okay, well, first I want to apologize for any dose of stress I gave the organizers with my Zoom woes. I've been on Zoom so much, I don't know, just the bad luck that all of a sudden it's not working, but I'm glad I'm here, and I hope I hold up for the duration of this session. So apologies for that. And also thanks to Helen and Abby at McIntosh for inviting me. And I want to begin by thanking the artists. This is a fabulously creative installation. To me, it embodies political art in the very best sense. It challenges people to think deeply about things that are out of sight, out of mind, or simply just taken for granted in everyday life. Okay, so I thought I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope this works. Just to have a little video accompaniment. Is it coming up there? Oops. Okay, well, I thought I'd begin my response or engagement with some context about the setting of the jungle, Chicago's famed Union stockyards, as a basis for thinking about why the book remains so incredibly current and so important to this day. So the first great site of industrial scale animal slaughter was actually not Chicago, but Cincinnati. Oops. Cincinnati had this very unpleasant nickname, Porkopolis. And this is where the mass killing of animals first took root. But it's the Union stockyards that take this to a wholly different scale in the 19th century. So the stockyards are opened at the end of the US Civil War at a time of immense social and ecological transformation and immense social and ecological violence. And they embody this in many ways. They embody these social and ecological violence that are playing out across the US West in the second half of the 19th century. This included genocidal wars waged by the US Army upon indigenous peoples of the grasslands, quickly appropriating most of the land from them, the decimation of the bison to the point of near extinction by the turn of the century. Bison herds once raged 30 million, some estimates, many more than that. At the time of European arrival, and even at the end of the Civil War, there were still about 10 million or so bison on the great grasslands. By the turn of the 20th century, around 1900, bison almost exterminated, about 1,000 left, which went hand in hand with the war against indigenous peoples. Another part of the social and ecological violence was the transformation of the great grasslands, the tall grass, the mixed grass, the short grass prairies, and the transformation, the appropriation of those from First Nations peoples, but also the utter transformation of those ecosystems. Only a few percent of natural grasslands still exist in North America, and transformed into oceans of corn and wheat and managed pasture, and also the replacement of buffalo with cattle and pigs. And in the 20th century, soybeans becomes part of this landscape, and all of which, these huge open grasslands converted into parcels of private property divided by barbed wire. And another part of the violence of this era is the increasing spatial and cognitive distance between people and the animals they consume. This is really the first time in world history that people are encountering the flesh of dead animals as food that they have not they're not at all proximate to. So cattle and pigs were exploding across the stolen and ecologically devastated landscapes of the US West. And there was a fast expanding rail network after the Civil War, racing miles a day that allowed animals to move over greater landscapes. And the Union stockyards become this sort of hub that connects Western production and Eastern markets. Again, animal lives connected to distant consumers. So the stockyards were this colossal system of holding pens. The pictures are just staggering to think of the scale of this. There's still, you can actually, if you go to Chicago, you can still see a little remnant of this. There's a little museum, but this once encompassed a huge area of Chicago. Part of the reason for the scale was that animals had to be fattened initially after they had been driven there, but also after rail transport to put on weight before slaughter and packing. And so this system encompassed both pigs and cattle. In this stockyards, there was a series of huge meatpacking companies that built upon the techniques that were pioneered in Cincinnati of slaughter and processing, and they greatly accelerated the speed and the scale with which animals could be killed, with fast-moving conveyor belts and disassembly lines. And they also accelerated the radical segmentation of labor. So the productive innovations of the stockyards helped to shape powerful ideas about mass production and about scientific management, in which the labor process gets broken down into smaller and smaller pieces of production, sometimes referred to as de-skilling. Again, the narrowing of production into these tiny, tiny pieces of the overall, the narrowing of labor into these tiny pieces of the overall production process. And the influence on Fordism, the labor regime that defined a large era of the 20th century in industrial societies. Fordism, Ford himself draws inspiration from the stockyards. He came to the stockyards and witnessed them, examined them in great detail, and described being awed and inspired by the way that labor was organized and regulated, disciplined, and how jobs were broken down into these small pieces of the production process, and this part of the great acceleration of production, the increasing output per worker. And he applied these ideas, obviously, to the automotive manufacturing sector that he's so famous for. I should also note that it was not only Henry Ford going and witnessing the spectacle of slaughter there. The stockyards were actually, believe it or not, a leading tourist attraction in Chicago. They welcomed visitors. This is very different than today's slaughterhouses that are almost impossible to ever get into, incredibly securitized. But in the 19th century and into the 20th century, the stockyards were a tourist attraction. And this not only involved those huge holding pens that I showed an image of, but there were catwalks over the kill floor and the packing lines. But not everyone was so impressed, of course, by this spectacle. And the stockyards also became notorious for their exploitation of immigrant labor from various parts of Europe, as Marilou mentioned, with the most pervasive ethnic groups represented in the overall mix of stockyard labor tending to shift over decades. Concern about the exploitation of labor is what brought the muckraking journalist, self-described socialist, novelist, and later himself a politician, Upton Sinclair. He wanted to write a book that would move people to organize. And what makes The Jungle such an epic novel, I think, is how it draws people into the working conditions so deeply, including the brutal ways that labor is disciplined, how choices are constrained, tensions between workers and rivalries play out. And I think most of all, or for me anyway, he brings to life the incredible violence of the slaughter process and the packing floor. To me, the novel seethes with the sense of the sweat and the misery of the workers, but also the blood and the suffering of animals dying on the accelerating kill floor. And ultimately, these two things are deeply entangled. The horrible conditions working people face and the suffering of animals. One very important aspect of the industrialization of animal slaughter, which I've written about, is that it contributes to the increasing disassociation between people and farm animals, which leads to a growing societal unconsciousness over time. And as I mentioned, these sorts of sites are no longer, spectacles for tourists to wander around. They're highly securitized, and they're mostly tucked away in suburban environments across North America today, part of that contemporary disassociation or societal unconsciousness. As William Cronin put it in his magisterial environmental history of Chicago and the US West and how these things were entangled, the industrialization of Chicago and the huge ecological and social transformations of the US West, he argues this was not, that one was not likely to forget that pigs and cattle had died prior to the stockyards, one was not likely to forget that pigs and cattle had died so that people ate. People usually consumed animals that they either knew or they knew the conditions of their life. And the stockyards is a key site of this momentous transformation. He says, in a world of ranches, packing plants, and refrigerator cars, these connections between people and animals are consuming vanish from easy view. The packing plants distance consumers, most of all, from the act of killing and the violence it entails. And more people, as they become accustomed to meat that is cut and carefully wrapped and displayed in a whole range of ways, they become more likely to forget or fail to remember that the thing they are purchasing once pulsed and breathed with a life of its own. And I think this dynamic, that is, to me, a big part of The Jungle has only deepened and really now increasingly a global phenomenon. For workers, the industrialization of slaughter and packing translated to the extreme simplification and monotony of tasks and a combination of physical and, I would argue, emotional and intellectual violence while people get trapped in a daily fast-paced rhythm of killing and bodily dismemberment. Now, as I indicated earlier, Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle with an explicitly political intent. He was a socialist, and it was almost like an appeal for people to see the need for workers to get together, get beyond their rivalries and divisions, get together and for labor to organize. And one of the probably the most famous quote of this book is he said he aimed for the heart, and by the heart he was implying the need for labor to mobilize, and he said, and instead I hit it in the belly, which means that the real political impact of this book, and it was a bestseller, the real political impact was in inspiring some increasing food safety laws, as people were literally grossed out by the depictions that come through of the kill floor and the blood and the guts. And again, the U.S. food safety, there's a direct line from this book into increasing efforts at food safety legislation. Now, workers in packing plants, slaughterhouses and packing plants did indeed organize. And for a time, this was a sector that was marked by high levels of unionization, and this organization brought considerable wage gains for a time. Packers, the Green Bay Packers, the word packer had a certain connotation for a certain period of time of organized labor and relatively strong wages and relatively stable jobs. But over time, the meatpacking industry has steadily undermined unionization in a variety of ways, and this has unfolded especially from the 1970s and especially the 80s onwards, including by moving huge slaughter facilities away from big cities like Chicago to smaller centers like Brandon. And they've also, a huge strategy that first played out in the US and now also in Canada is for the sector to move towards recent immigrants, as Richard and Marilou illustrate so evocatively. Now, since the time of the jungle, industrial livestock production has become vastly more mechanized and automated. So the sites, and this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about working on, is not just these environments, but also the industrial livestock operations and feedlots and how those things are organized. And a lot of that has become very mechanized, automated, from robotic milking machines to automated feeders, to automated egg removal systems. But there are still tremendous limits to substituting technology for labor and advancing robotics in slaughter and packing plants. Animals tend to squirm, kick, or otherwise resist domination when they're fearful and in pain. And human dexterity, adaptability, reflexes are needed to respond to the unpredictability of animals in distress, especially since there's a need to prevent damage to the end commodity, the body, the dead body of the animal. So human labor is needed for a wide range of grim tasks at these sites, such as offloading animals from transport trucks, moving them along, often with electric shocks or by hitting them, shackling them then to slaughter lines, firing stun guns, slicing throats. There are also considerable limits to how much packing lines can be mechanized, and this is where the biggest labor is, with workers needed for tasks like deskinning, deboning, eviscerating, and sectioning carcasses. And for many workers there, they will spend an entire day basically making the same cut upon thousands of animals, well, in the poultry plant, thousands of animals, in a beef or pig plant, less, but still many, many animals, basically making the same cut as these animals fly across the disassembly line. Now, so again, there is a limit to the substitutability of technology for labor in these environments. Among other things, these environments are sites of tremendous injury risk. So these have very high rates of repetitive stress injury and also severe injuries. So fast-moving kill floors are very dangerous for the workers as they encounter writhing animals who are flying across these lines. And again, the disassembly lines where workers are making these quick and repeated cuts as animals move down the line. So this results in very high rates of workplace accidents, repetitive stress disorders, stress and injury leaves, and are very common. And the job turnover is the highest of any form of industrial labor in North America, as well as now being among the lowest paying. So again, very different from the early 20th century where unionization had led to considerable wage gains. Now this is a job filled with intense injury risks and chronic repetitive stress disorder, very high rates of turnover, and very low pay. Beyond the physical health risks and insecurity of these environments lays an untold psychological burden from inflicting pain and deadly acts as a routine part of the labor process, and from immersion in environments that are filled with so much evident suffering, animals calling out in stress and pain, or encountering these recently killed bodies. So workers in slaughterhouses and packing plants are constantly faced with the sense of stress and fear and physical pain heard from animals, and of course the immediacy of death and bloodshed and dismemberment. So on one level, there is something very familiar about the reduction of work to a series of repetitive, mind-numbing tasks that comprise small fragments of the overall production process. As I indicated, the stockyards help to inspire the Fordist labor regime. So there's something very familiar to that segmentation of the labor process. But there's also something very particular, I would argue, to these environments, to the psychosocial environments and impacts of the slaughterhouse and packing lines. And US writer Jonathan Safran Foer, in his book Eating Animals, argues this is the most perfect workplace alienation that exists in the world right now. Now, Richard and Marilou's installation draws our attention to the people confronting this alienation and challenges us to think about what is enduring in it from over the past century or so, what is new, and for me, how can we allow these systems of production to continue? I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Tony. That was incredible. I'm almost overwhelmed by the perfection of the matching of this panel. So I had a couple of questions, but they're extremely broad. So first, I would actually like to give Richard and Marilou the option of maybe even responding in case they had, I don't know if you two have anything you would like to say in response. But we also have, we have some questions already waiting from students. So I'm gonna prioritize that over any of my own questions. And again, I would also like to just, to encourage students to continue posting questions on the Q&A. And Tony will unmute you as well so that we can sort of be more conversational for the duration. So Richard and Marilou, did you want to respond, or would you guys like to go straight into questions?
Well, I would just like to really thank Tony for his amazing presentation. Prior to the project and during the project, we had been reading tons of stuff, and he just put so much of that history and so evocatively in such a short amount of time. And I had goosebumps throughout just recalling all of the research and that we had gone through in the preparation for this project. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
But please, we would be pleased to field any questions to ourselves or to Tony.
Okay, so I'll just start looking through some of these questions. So the first question was it a conscious decision to not include sound in the first video, the meatpacking performance?
That was a decision of removal. We tried different levels of removal, as I mentioned. If you compare what we see in the video to the photos that Tony was showing, there's so much that has been subtracted. I mean, first you see the animal bodies, this process of dismemberment, all the machineries and the sounds and the equipment that the workers are wearing. And I think the sound was this last thing that we thought, can we emphasize the movement and the presence of the people in the video by removing the sound? And we did, but yeah.
So the next question, which I think I actually already answered, is I would love to view this exhibition. Is it live where we could have to go at a specific time or just shown in the gallery throughout the entire day? So it is, as I said, it is in the gallery from 10 to 5 each day. You do have to book, an appointment through our website. So you just have to go to McIntoshGallery.ca and navigate to the visit tab and select the plan your visit page. And then you'll be able to find links to book your visit. And as I mentioned, for anybody who's not in London, you can see excerpts from some of the videos on our website. Okay, next question. So about the workers rather than the artwork, did many people go home before the 2-year qualifying period? There's a little sort of after question. He says, that is, did they get fed up and leave?
It's, workers have different histories. In the people that we've met, some people wanted to leave the factory, even got hired in another factory, and then they realized that through their contract, they were tied to this one employer. So often the programs under which they work are very strict. First, they actually tie the workers to their employer, and going back home is not necessarily an option. So some people did, some people decided to not go through the whole 2 years in the people that we've met. But some people also realized that they would be wasting all of the time that they had already worked at the plant in their path towards permanent residency in Canada, and decided to go back to their employer.
One thing that we didn't mention was that most of the recent hires are not through the foreign worker program. Most of they kind of because of cost and because of the efficiency of that program, they started to turn towards refugees. And so they've been tapping into refugee populations in Canada and hiring them, and not having them to have the expense of recruitment and the like. Refugees that we've been meeting that are mostly from places like Somalia, Eritrea, they often will leave their job before, basically as they please. So they start working and they realize that it's very difficult, and then they'll leave, and they'll go to another city like Toronto or something like that, or they'll stay in Brandon and try to find another job. So they obviously, since they're not tied down for citizenship, they were a lot freer to move around.
Okay, I'm going to scroll down a little to get to a question which maybe is as applicable to Tony. Can industrial livestock production be improved in your view? So I'll throw that one out to Tony.
Well, that's a big question. I think we're just looking at a segment of this whole story, right? The end process of slaughter and packing. Industrial livestock production as a whole is something that has enormous, not just social, interspecies implications for workers and for animals at the point of death, but it has huge environmental implications. This is, one of the biggest users of land. So industrial livestock production commands about 1/3 of the world's arable land. So huge amounts of arable land are flowing into concentrated populations of animals. And this is a big part of the overall story of why livestock production is widely recognized as one of the biggest factors in climate change. The emissions associated with sites of industrial livestock production, and there's a whole range of factors here, from the belching and flatulence of animals to, well, of certain animals, ruminants, to the huge resource budgets associated with the feed, to the heating and transport of animals. So there's a whole story of resource budgets and pollution loads that not only factors in climate change, but is a significant factor in climate change. So to answer that question, to me, it takes us way beyond the scope of just the sites of killing and packing, and it's a, you know, much bigger question in terms of the impacts, again, for workers, for animal lives, the way animal lives, and the way animal lives are dominated, not just at the end site of killing, but in terms of the sites of growing, the conditions they face, to me, is another gigantic ethical issue. And then again, the environmental story, which is something I've spent a lot of time myself working on. So to me, these are systems that there's all kinds of efforts being made to sort of modify some of their environmental impacts. Like you go around outside of London and you'll see lots of factory farms with solar panels on the top of them. There's increasing efforts to capture the flatulence of cattle with backpacks, efforts to try and capture the methane emitting off pig lagoons and then reburn that fuel. So there's all kinds of little kind of technological responses around some of these big resource and pollution questions. But ultimately, to me, the scale of production it just needs to be dismantled. Today, the average human being consumes almost twice as much meat as the average human did a generation ago. So today, the average person on Earth consumes 45 kilograms of meat. This is a world of 8 billion people. Just about 2 generations ago, when there was about 3 billion people on Earth, the average person consumed about 23 kilograms of meat. So we have, you know, this near doubling of per capita meat consumption on a planetary scale in a context of the human population growing from 3 to almost 8 billion now. So again, to me, there's many dimensions to that question, but to me, the core point is that what I got to at the end of the talk is that these systems of production, and not just the point of industrial slaughter, but the whole system that goes into it, that feeds into those, you know, accelerating production lines, that whole system needs to be rethought.
Okay, so I think I'm going to take one last question, although there are quite a few here. I'm going to go with, okay, hang on, there's another one that's just popped up. Okay, yeah, this is a good one. And I think this is going to be open to all three of you. So several times the speakers made comparisons between animals and humans, using the way animals were treated to expound on the poor working conditions of the human workers. Could that comparison be made the other way around, expounding on the treatment of the animals by noticing patterns in how the humans are treated?
You want to go first on that, Richard, Marilou?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. I think a simple answer is that we're all animals. So who's the animal? But in this context, if you look kind of a broader look at the way capitalism deals with life, can definitely bring the comparison from all directions, that animals being raised and produced to create a profit, or a certain system of bringing workers, submitting them to certain conditions. Yeah, I would say that you can look at it both ways. And the original comparison, though, comes from the book of Upton Sinclair, where we shortened a section from a passage from his book that we rename The Worker is Compared to the Hog.
Tony, did you want to say anything?
Well, I'm not sure if it was Richard or Marilou who quoted which I think is the most quoted line from that book, is, you know, this was the spirit of capitalism made flesh. And I think to me, I mean, I'd be reluctant to compare the experience of workers with that of animals. Animals are effectively, I mean, humans are still waged laborers in the system, again, increasingly exploited and facing high levels of injury and turnover and insecurity and low pay. But animals are living lives of absolute misery from birth to, you know, a terrifying end. And that is, you know, to me, that is part of the spirit of capitalism made flesh, is the reduction of animals to these almost object-like things where their lives, you know, basically have almost no legal protections. These are animals are in livestock sector have almost no legal protections. Poultry have almost none, and this is where the vast majority of animal lives are in terms of individual animal lives. To go back to that time frame I was talking about before, you know, a few generations ago, 1960, there was about 8 billion animals killed for food every year. Today, there's about 75 billion. And in the coming few decades, that's expected to reach about 120 billion animals killed for food every year, overwhelmingly produced in industrial systems. And poultry is the biggest driver of that story of individual animal lives skyrocketing. Because there's smaller bodies and so many more individual lives. And poultry birds in industrial systems live about 6 weeks. And the story of their suffering is not just at the point of slaughter, hanging down, shackled by their feet, flying around, whizzing around, about to have their necks slit. The suffering that they face is from the time they are born, sexed, layer hens, basically male layer hens when they're born, they're instantly ground up, eviscerated, bagged, gassed, and broilers basically live an average of about 6 weeks, some even less, in conditions of incredible confinement, great density. And so to me, you know, their suffering is something that is, again, I see them both as aspects of capital, the spirit of capitalism made flesh, the degradation of labor, the segmentation of labor into these smaller tasks, and in this case, very violent tasks, and I, you know, the reduction of animals into object-like commodities. To me is something that's quite distinct.
Well, on that note, even though there are still many questions remaining, and we could definitely keep on going, was there one that you particularly wanted to answer? I'm going to wrap it up, but if there's one you wanted, if there's a question you wanted.
Actually, I just wanted to respond to Tony, because he made a sense of a gradation of suffering in very precise, quantifiable terms, in terms of course, the workers and the animals in the meat production industry are not treated the same way if you look at it in terms of very specific conditions. But I think there is a spirit, if you talk in a more poetic sense, of disregard for human life, and not disregard for all human life, but for some human life. And I think what happened in the spring, for example, in the meatpacking industry with the COVID, the spread of COVID-19, especially in the US, and the kind of reglementation that was imposed that facilitated it, even made it mandatory for factories to remain open without providing any protection for the workers, without any specification of how they were going to be protected, for me is a clear indicator that when it gets down to it, the workers are treated with very little values. And this came up from regulation imposed by Trumps and then in different states. And it was extremely violent. And there were dozens of deaths right in the first months of the pandemic.
Did you want to also respond, Tony, or shall we wrap it up?
I think it's a great point. Absolutely. And I mean, these are environments that are moist. People are in close proximity, and it's just, I mean, it's a very prime environment, as some have written about, for the spread of this pandemic. And then, yeah, to recognize in the face of the pandemic and various outbreaks in meatpacking plants enforcing, you know, these low-wage, insecure workers back into the plant absolutely is a wanton disregard, and couldn't agree more strongly with that point.
Okay, on that note, I am actually definitely going to bring this one to a close. It's really such a shame we're doing this over Zoom because, you know, I really feel like the three of you should be like going out for a beer, like to keep on going with this. But unfortunately, we do have to bring this to a close. So I'm going to turn it over to Christoph because he has a few words for his students before we sign off. Oh, and actually, before I hand it over to Christoph, I do want to say I want to give an enormous thank you to Richard and Marilou and Tony. That was an absolutely extraordinary discussion. It was profound and multi-layered. It was it was excellent. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks so much for inviting me, and so well done.